The air crackled with anticipation, thick with the unspoken expectation of his downfall. They were certain Elijah Morris was an anomaly, a misplaced piece in their carefully constructed puzzle. But destiny had a different equation in mind. When Elijah deciphered a problem that had stumped even the most seasoned minds from MIT, a hush fell over the auditorium, heavy and absolute. For the first time, those who had once dismissed him were confronted with the undeniable truth of their own prejudice. The University of Michigan. A somber morning painted the advanced calculus lecture hall in hues of cold fluorescent white. Over 100 students were present. A sea of furrowed brows and furiously scribbling hands braced for the intellectual storm that was Professor Helena Cartwright. This was no ordinary class. A panel of professors from various departments occupied the front rows, their presence lending an air of judicial scrutiny to the proceedings. They weren't there to learn. They were there to judge. This was an open lecture, a public demonstration of Cartwright's rigorous, some would say ruthless, teaching methods. In their eyes, such severity was a necessary filter. Mediocrity had no place in the unforgiving world of mathematics. Those deemed unfit would be culled from the herd in this very arena. Lost amidst the rows, a young man sat quietly, his fingers toying with a pen. He made no attempt to draw attention, no inclination towards idle chatter. A simple gray hoodie, well-worn jeans, and a notebook filled with precise calculations. This was Elijah Morris. He didn't need to announce his presence. The language of numbers, which danced in his mind, spoke volumes for him. Yet for some, the shade of his skin was reason enough to cast him in a lesser light. In the front row, Professor Benjamin Whitaker, a titan among lecturers, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed in a gesture of condescension. His gaze swept across the students, halting abruptly when it fell upon Elijah. A subtle smirk played on his lips. "That black student in advanced math," he muttered to a colleague. "I'll wager he won't survive this session." The neighboring professors nodded in silent agreement, as if Whitaker had voiced an undeniable truth. These abstract sciences, they believed, simply weren't suited for them. Likely slipped in through some diversity initiative. A ripple of suppressed laughter echoed through the room. The subject of their discourse was not mathematics, but Elijah. He remained unmoved. He had encountered this brand of prejudice before. They believed he would falter, that their assumptions were justified. Little did they know that this day would etch itself into their memories as a monumental miscalculation. The atmosphere in the hall grew palpably tense as Professor Cartwright's sharp heels clicked a staccato rhythm on the cold tile floor. Her entrance commanded absolute silence. No one dared to breathe too loudly, to shift in their seat. Her posture was impeccably erect, her silver-rimmed glasses reflecting the unforgiving light. Her face was a mask of unwavering confidence, an authority that needed no verbal proclamation. Cartwright surveyed the room with deliberate slowness. She wasn't merely taking attendance. She was assessing who possessed the mental fortitude to keep pace and who was merely occupying precious space. Students averted their gaze, as if fearing that even a momentary lapse in concentration would mark them as targets. Then her gaze lingered on Elijah. The duration was fleeting, yet long enough to convey her unspoken judgment. It wasn't simply observation, but a silent challenge, a question that resonated in the air. "Do you truly believe you belong here?" The briefest flicker of skepticism crossed her features before she dismissed him with a glance, as if his presence was unworthy of further consideration. The moment was subtle, but Elijah registered it. She pivoted, picked up a piece of chalk, and with precise, deliberate strokes, wrote on the board. "Last week we explored multivariable limits. Today, we delve into Laplace transforms." Complex equations bloomed across the board, one after the other, rendered with flawless precision. The students scrambled to record them, desperate not to fall behind. Some were lost after the first line, but no one dared to voice their confusion. In Cartwright's class, getting lost was a personal failing, not a teaching deficiency. In the front row, the visiting professors nodded in approval, gratified by Cartwright's rigorous approach. They admired not only her brilliance, but also her unwavering standards. They believed a true teacher wasn't one who nurtured growth, but one who ruthlessly weeded out the unworthy. In the middle row, Elijah refrained from frantic note-taking. He observed, his eyes tracing the equations with calm focus. While others struggled to keep pace, he studied the symbols as if they were familiar pieces of a well-understood puzzle. Then a subtle frown creased his brow, a minor error, perhaps imperceptible to most, but to Elijah, it was a critical flaw. He glanced around. No one seemed to have noticed. They were merely transcribing the equations, their minds disengaged from the underlying principles. Cartwright continued writing, exuding an aura of infallibility. Elijah revisited the equation, his conviction hardening. The error was undeniable, a subtle misapplication of the transform. While the immediate impact might be negligible, its propagation would inevitably lead to a catastrophic derailment of the final result. He hesitated, acutely aware that voicing his observation would thrust him into the unforgiving spotlight. Cartwright was not known for welcoming correction, especially in the presence of her peers and students. Challenges to her authority were not taken lightly. Furthermore, Elijah was not naive enough to believe that Cartwright was the sole harbinger of prejudice in the room. A phalanx of guest professors sat in judgment, their initial gazes betraying a clear disdain. To speak up was to confront not only Cartwright, but the entire edifice of institutional bias. He could choose to remain silent, to let the error slide, and continue the lecture like everyone else. Yet the mere thought churned within him like a poison. Elijah abhorred arrogance, despised those who believed in their own infallibility, and detested those who condescended to others based on superficial differences. The decision crystallized in a matter of seconds. He drew a slow, steadying breath, raised his hand, and shattered the prevailing silence. "Professor, there's an error in the transform." Time seemed to congeal. Cartwright's hand froze mid-stroke. The entire class became an echo chamber of silence. A multitude of eyes swiveled toward Elijah. But the most unsettling aspect was Cartwright's faint smile. It was devoid of warmth, devoid of kindness. It was the smile of a predator relishing the audacity of its prey, each second stretched into an eternity. Cartwright didn't need to raise her voice, didn't need to display anger. She merely studied Elijah, dissecting him like a mathematical problem whose solution she already possessed. Then a slight smile flickered across her face. "A mistake, you say?" She pivoted, scanned the board with an air of theatrical consideration, then turned back to Elijah. "Are you certain?" Her voice was silken, yet it concealed a snare laced with menace. A few of the guest professors smirked, their disdain palpable. Whispers rippled through the student ranks. A professor seated beside Whitaker leaned in and murmured, "I told you, he's just sealed his fate." Whitaker chuckled softly, folded his arms, and settled in to witness the impending demolition. Elijah met Cartwright's gaze unflinchingly. "Yes, I'm certain." Cartwright's smile vanished. For a fleeting moment, Elijah glimpsed a flicker of uncertainty in her expression. The smugness dissipated, replaced by a moment of raw contemplation. As if she were genuinely considering the possibility of her own fallibility, the lecture hall seemed to suspend itself in that instant. The rustling of pages, the tapping of keyboards, all faded into silence. Only one element remained, the razor-sharp intensity of Cartwright's gaze. Her eyes pierced through the student who dared to challenge her authority, conveying not anger, not raised volume, but a chilling force sufficient to make every cell in the recipient's body shrink in trepidation. "Do you think, or do you know?" The question echoed in the stillness, precise and unwavering, like a blade drawn across glass. There was no eruption of rage, only an arctic coldness. An unspoken reminder that within these walls, only one voice was permitted to pronounce the truth. Another student froze, clutching her pen as if it were a lifeline. "I just thought that, if you're not sure, don't waste my time." The invisible blow had landed. Her face flushed crimson. She lowered her head, retreating as if she yearned to disappear. Silence descended, unbroken. No one dared to become the next target. Elijah closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. He had witnessed this scene play out far too often. Professors who erected themselves upon pedestals of self-importance, treating students as beings devoid of the right to question, like children to be disciplined through intimidation. He loathed that type of instructor, and so he raised his hand again. Continues.